Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Carter Friend, the CEO at York County Community Action. And thank you so much for coming to our third legislative summit on homelessness. We're going to actually ask everyone to try and move up. We'd like to make this as conversational as possible. So now that you're settled into your seats, we're going to actually ask you to get up and move closer to the front here. We are going to stay up on stage only because we're also videotaping this. And so we want the cameras to be able to capture that. But if folks can move up more closer to the front here, the first few rows, then we can make this conversational. And thank you, YCCAC staff, for modeling coming up. Appreciate that. So thank you again, everybody, for coming this evening. We're looking forward to a really good conversation, as we've had the past couple of years, around homelessness and some of the policy issues related to homelessness in preparation for the upcoming legislative session. And I'm here welcoming you, but I'm really welcoming you on behalf of all the partners that are holding this session. It's a really unique group of 8 municipalities and 8 nonprofit organizations in York County that have come together to advocate on behalf of issues and raise awareness on behalf of issues related to homelessness. And so you can see it's the municipality city of Biddeford, town of Elliott, Kennebunk Port, Kittery, Old Orchard Beach, Saco, and Sanford. And then also nonprofit organizations, Caring Unlimited, Fairtide and Mainspring, Sanford Housing Authority, Seeds of Hope, Southern Maine Agency on Aging, York Community Service Association, York County Community Action, and York County Shelter Programs. And so I don't think there is a coalition like this anywhere else in the state doing this work with this kind of diversity of representation and also this kind of diversity of geographic spread across the entire county. And so I think that's a unique and important opportunity for us to be able to speak on behalf of the county on these issues. This is not a unique group if folks, or a limited group if folks are from municipalities or organizations and are interested in joining us. Please email me. My contact information is in the packet that you received. So at the session tonight, we're going to be touching on really 3 primary issues. First, we're going to take a look at a reminder about the housing continuum, which we've used the past several years to create some context and talk about legislative successes from last session. Then we're going to, Jake Hammer is going to talk about the impact of homelessness on general assistance. Then we'll take a few minutes for folks to ask questions related to that, particularly for legislators. Make sure legislators get a chance to ask questions they might have related to GA and homelessness. Then we're going to talk about the impact of substance use disorder and mental health conditions on folks who are chronically homeless and gaps in the system. And we're going to use 2 case studies and compare those 2 case studies that had very different outcomes to highlight the gaps. And then after that, we will again have an opportunity for questions. You should have all gotten, when you walked in the door, a packet. And that packet has 3 things in it. It has an agenda, which also includes contact information and some key definitions for this evening. There then is a 4-page summary handout, which has some of the highlights from some of the slides that you're going to see this evening. And then there's a 2-page handout with material from the York County Homeless Response Hub. And the coordinator, Abigail Woods, is here this evening if anyone has any questions about the hub. We also will be sending the materials, all the materials you see tonight, including the slides. We'll send those out by email after the session, and as well as a link to the video of the session. Before we get going, I'd also like to thank folks who were involved in helping prepare for this evening. And so you're going to see a lot of very good data related to general assistance. So I wanted to thank folks who helped prepare that. So Gina Cardamone from Old Orchard Beach, Jake Hammer from Biddeford, Vicki Martin from Sanford, and Emily Flingstrom from Kittery and Elliott. Also wanted to thank folks who helped with logistics of putting the evening together. And so Larissa Ricketts from the city of Sanford and Mary Queen from York County Community Action. And then a particular thank to Megan Boisvert for her work putting together the PowerPoint presentation and other materials. So thank you very much for all your work putting the evening together. So let's move on to our first item, which is a discussion of the housing continuum and then legislative successes from the last session. I'd like to introduce Emily Flingstrom, who's the Executive Director of Fairtide and Mainspring. And I just want to share this because it's fun. So Emily and her now husband, before they had kids, motorcycled from Ann Arbor, Michigan to Tierra del Fuego, the tip of southern South America. So that is Emily.
That makes me sound way cooler than I am, but thank you, Carter. That was a lifetime ago. So those of you who attended last year, you may remember that we opened with a conversation about the housing continuum, and we wanted to do that again this year because I think it really lays the groundwork for the presentations and the conversations that will come. It really underscores the fact that we can't look at homelessness in a silo, that if we really want to address the issue of homelessness, we need to look at it as part of a larger system. And so the housing continuum really starts at one end with homelessness, and at the other end is home ownership. And there are lots of other points along the way. And a healthy housing continuum has a diverse range of options and a sufficient number of options at every point of the housing continuum. And that's not what we have right now. We have a system that is stuck at every level. So individuals and households and families are stuck at certain points along this continuum. And so just as an example, and I think I used this last year, we have a number of older adults who are living in very large homes where they raise their families and would love to downsize, but they can't find a smaller house that is affordable for them to purchase. And so they stay in those large houses. And therefore, there aren't as many large houses for young families who are currently raising their kids in a rental, who would love to move into a home. And so then our rental market gets clogged up and prices go up because demand is higher than the actual supply. And so young students graduating from college or entering the workforce can't find rental units that are affordable. And that trickles all the way down to our emergency shelters. And right now, our emergency shelters are really not functioning as emergency resources. We have people that are stuck in shelters for long periods of time because there just isn't any place for them to move out and up into. And so because of that, people that find themselves experiencing homelessness have no place to go. And so we're seeing a growing number of people who are living in their cars or who are putting up tents, doubled up with family and things like that. So really, in order to address homelessness, we have to be investing resources in all the other points along the housing continuum in order to get the system flowing again and to get to a point where we have a healthy spectrum that's moving. Luckily, we have many state legislators who understand this. Many of you are here this evening and have helped to pass a number of bills that inject resources into different points along this continuum. So we wanted to just start by saying just a general thank you and express our appreciation for all of the work that was done in the last legislative session to invest in addressing homelessness and the issue of affordable housing. And I wanted to run through some of those successes now because there are some that are really really big wins. So LD 698 provides one-time funds for our emergency shelter system, which is much needed. LD 731 prohibits municipalities from barring the creation of shelters in their communities. LD 384 and 747 provide funds to prevent and end student homelessness. LD 1082 is a huge historical win for the creation of affordable housing. It increases the real estate transfer tax for purchases over $1 million, and that provides ongoing funding for affordable housing development in our state. LD 146 increases tax credits for historical rehab projects. LD 1829, another really historic bill. It's a land use bill that's going to bring a lot of changes to every municipality in Maine that's going to help remove barriers to building housing and building affordable housing. LD 215 reimburses municipalities for the cost of supporting someone who's in a recovery residence. So that's a lot. That's a lot of really big wins. So again, our deepest appreciation for all of those who helped get these bills passed. And there are many more that are in progress that have been continued to this next legislative session that include funding and programs for prevention, diversion, voucher resources, some GA bills, and some affordable housing bonds. So we will continue to advocate for those bills. We hope that you as well will continue to support those and see them through the finish line. So we clearly have made some progress. It's going to take some time to see the impact of these bills, and there still is a ways to go. I wanted to just take a few minutes to share some data that can hopefully paint a picture of the situation we're in right now with homelessness in York County. And what I'm really excited about is that we can do that this year. And that's because of the homeless response hubs and their great work in the state of Maine. So for those of you that are not familiar with that effort, a couple of years ago, Maine started undergoing a complete change in the way that we address and respond to homelessness. And that started with the creation of 9 homeless resource hubs, and they're largely divided along county lines, although not exactly. And every hub consists of a diverse group of stakeholders that work together with the goal of reaching functional zero of homelessness in our state. And what that means really is that homelessness in Maine becomes rare, brief, and non-reoccurring, so that the number of people entering homelessness is the same as the number of people exiting. So people enter the system, exit the system. And so one of the first steps that the hubs were tasked with in this process was reaching quality data. And what that really means is that we have the numbers, the number of people experiencing homelessness, the number of people coming into and out of the system that we feel really confident about, that we feel really good that those are accurate. And there's a whole long process to get there. And we are not quite there yet, but thanks to Abigail Woods and her leadership, we have made great progress. And so we now have data that we can look at any given time, at any given month, to see how many people are experiencing homelessness in our county, how many people have come into the system, and how many people have exited the system. So I wanted to share a little bit of that. Again, caveat, it is not technically quality data, but it gives us some idea. So this chart shows the number of folks that have come into our homeless system and those that have exited by month. The inflow is divided into a couple different categories. The largest one that you'll see, the dark blue, I think, is those that are newly identified. That doesn't mean that they're new to homelessness, but it means they're new to us and our system, that they have, for the first time, interacted with us or one of our partner providers. And then the numbers that represent the exits from homelessness are also divided into a couple different categories. The orangish, reddish one means they exited to housing. That's what we want. We want people exiting our system and moving on into housing. The other category is exit to inactive, which means we've lost touch with them or they've disengaged from working with one of our partner agencies. I think the takeaway from this graph is that, by and large, there's a larger inflow than there is outflow. So that's an issue that we need to be working on and looking at. And then this chart just shows the number of folks who are experiencing homelessness every month in York County. So if we look at the most recent data, we're somewhere in the mid 300s of individuals experiencing homelessness. So again, not totally quality data, meaning it may not be 100% accurate, but it's better than we've ever had to share. And what's really exciting about it is that we can see impact of resources and programs in a positive way. So once we start seeing the impact of some of these bills that have been passed and the resources that are coming forward, hopefully we'll be able to see that reflected here. Unfortunately, it's the other way too. So the federal cuts that are coming down, we will likely see the impact of that too. But we have a way to track it now. And I think I have consistently heard from our state legislators that show me the data, show me where the issue is. And so now we're able to do that, and that is really exciting. So from there, I'm going to hand it over to Jake, who's going to talk a little bit about general assistance and the impact of homelessness on that program.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Jake Hammer. I am the supervisor for the City of Bedford's General Assistance Department. We are a 3-person operation, which is much larger. I believe it is 3 full-time employees is the largest in New York County. That being said, we are still taxed. We see quite a few people daily. Our schedules are full. We do beyond just appointments. We do walk-ins, we do phone calls, we do screenings and partnerships with agencies around just to try to help mitigate emergencies before they occur. And I think I can posit and say that that is the case for most of the GAs in this county. So a couple things to know before kind of getting into the numbers is the narrative behind them. General assistance is governed by Chapter 1161 of Title 22. The entire chapter is dedicated to general assistance, and a couple little snippets from that is that a general assistance program, by definition, is a service administered by a municipality for the immediate aid of persons who are unable to provide the basic necessities essential to maintain themselves or their families. Every municipality has to have general assistance. From Kittery to Madawaska, there's some kind of general assistance program. It looks wildly different town to town. Like I said, ours is the largest operation in York County, followed by Sanford, which has 2.5 full-time employees. Another little snippet that I think is important to this conversation is subsection 4308 of Title 22, in that a person, including a person experiencing or facing homelessness, who does not have sufficient resources to provide one or more basic necessities in an emergency, is eligible for emergency general assistance, even when that applicant has been found ineligible for non-emergency general assistance. So there is this dichotomy within general assistance. It's all supposed to be for emergencies, but there are two technically separate programs. There is general assistance, there is emergency general assistance. Again, a little wonky in that it's all for emergencies, different names. Regular general assistance, if you will, non-emergency general assistance, there are rules. There's rules around all of it, but there are pretty hard guidelines around how we're supposed to administer that program. There are eligibility guidelines financially. We have conditions for future eligibility if it's more than the first time that you've applied. It's a fairly rigid program. Emergency general assistance it's a very gray space in that we as administrators recognize that there's something that needs mitigated right now that could lead to life-altering circumstances, right? For folks living in homes, a lot of times that could be lack of heat. That could be lack of electricity that makes your home uninhabitable. That could be there's an eviction impending. You have a family. We have determined that this is an emergency that needs mitigated. Maybe some of the guardrails that we generally have don't apply. We do have space within the statute, within local ordinance, and within DHHS rule to make that determination. So one of the things that's important with this 4308 piece is that homelessness, folks who are experiencing it or facing it, potentially qualify for that emergency eligibility. And I say potentially loosely in that they pretty much do qualify for that emergency eligibility. Now, within York County, we do have some pretty unique identifiers of our county that differ from the rest of the state. As of earlier this year, I'm sure you all know, we have no emergency shelter. The closest thing to that is our overnight warming center in Biddeford, as well as the family warming center in Sanford, both of which are wildly inadequate for the numbers that Emily just shared. The warming center in Biddeford has a maximum capacity of 50 people on any given night. The Sanford family shelter is significantly smaller than that, and as the name implies, is restricted purely to families. So what we have is a resource for shelter in one of the coldest places in the nation that is wildly inadequate, which then leads, local general assistances to oftentimes see the emergency for what it is, an emergency, and fund some shelter option, i.e. hotels most of the time. That's generally one of the quickest and simplest routes to get somebody out of the cold, out of an emergency. We do have a unique mix of urban, suburban, and rural municipalities. When we all get together in a room, sometimes it's like we're all speaking different languages because our situations are so wildly different. Us and Biddeford and Sanford oftentimes have very similar circumstances. You'll see by the data, they look very, very, very similar. It's pretty cathartic to look at, if I'm being honest, but that's wildly different than what Limerick is seeing, which it might be one person a year. It's wildly different than what Saco and Old Orchard and some of these other kind of more suburban spaces manage. Additionally, we do have multiple service center communities, so it is spread out in that when people come for services, they come to separate sections of this county. Biddeford has a hospital, Sanford has a hospital. People staying down south might be more inclined to do things in Rochester, Kittery kind of area. There's these pockets of population where people go to get their services met. Those service center communities tend to have the highest numbers when it comes to GA eligibility, just because that's where people's services are, where they can survive, where they stay the easiest. The other piece that I want to look at is that we are a gateway into the state, as well as a gateway out of the state. Specifically the I-95 corridor. A lot of our towns see a lot of folks who are truly transient by nature, in that, Maine is a nice place to be during the summertime, not just for you and me, but for everybody, even those who lack homes. A lot of times what we see is folks kind of working their way up the highway, going town to town, kind of seeing how they can meet their immediate needs each day. A lot of times, if they present on our doorstep, we have to help assist in that emergency. Lack of food can be an emergency. Certainly during the wintertime, needs are a lot more severe. It's tough to go from, somebody works their way up from Kittery to Kennebunk, to Biddeford, to Saco, to Old Orchard, up into Portland, or vice versa, going back down. Maybe you have some folks that we see have burnt bridges in Portland, just don't want to be in Portland for whatever reason, and start working their way back down. That's not something that's foreign to us as GA departments in York County. So I'm a fan of numbers, and like I said, this is one of the things that is kind of cathartic to see, is that we're all experiencing similar kind of situations. These are number of GA cases served. So one of the things you'll see, the scales are different for each of the graphs, but they do travel in a fairly similar, specifically Biddeford and Sanford have a almost identical trajectory, but Old Orchard as well. We were able to collect data for this session tonight from Biddeford, Old Orchard, Sanford, Kittery, and Elliott. I'm excited to see over time, as we collect more and more municipalities, how we see that the story, as I would guess, is essentially the same town to town, just on different scales. You'll see 2025, Biddeford peaked at 834 cases that year. Sanford peaked at 338, Old Orchard at 230. These are numbers, especially, with 3 full-time people, we can manage. It's not easy by any means. We're working for our pay. But when you have offices that the general assistance administrator may also be the city clerk, may also be, the local health officer, and 4 other titles, these are things. This is a taxing system. Granted, these are cases in general, so there are other factors beyond homelessness that play into this. But a large portion of this, as we'll see in a second, is emergency housing. It is preventing homelessness. It is addressing the immediate impacts of homelessness. So with our budgets in general, this is one of the things that municipalities are looking at the strongest. We have, over time, you'll see that the amount that we've budgeted and the amount spent have grown exponentially. And again, the scales are different on each of these, so take a look at that. But the projected for 2026 is even higher growth, up against even tighter budgets all around. As cities are dealing with just the high cost of living, the stresses of budget increases on the taxpayers, oftentimes GA gets a restricted budget. That being said, the expenses we have to spend above the budget. Statutorily, we do not have a choice. If there's an emergency, we have to do what we can to cure it, regardless of the amount in the budget. So what we're seeing is our expenses ballooning year over year. And that's across the board. I would posit that is statewide, but with our York County numbers, that is certainly something that we're seeing, Biddeford, Sanford, Old Orchard. One of the things to be just cognizant of is that housing does and has essentially always drove the majority of GA cost. Rents are expensive. Oftentimes, the amount allowable for rents is higher than food, utilities, some of the other options that are necessities that we can cover. What we see though is a pretty steady increase of the amount of GA that is spent on housing, temporary housing, rent, versus everything else. Everything else is such a small portion comparatively. I think if you look at Sanford's number even, it's significantly smaller. 4% is everything else. The rest of ours sit between that 85 and 90% range. So some of the things that we want to address on, when we look at this data, what are things that could be helpful, things that are realistic, things that are actually already in the work for the most part. LD 1732 passed in the last year. It actually became codified in statute that a central GA database would be developed, something that would help us be able to identify duplication points, fraud prevention in some cases, help us to really, almost track the data as it comes. That has not come to fruition. In the statute, it said by July of 2025, we should have that. That is not the case. One of the concerns to me is that, the agency that audits us for compliance is currently out of compliance with this. There's a whole lot of other issues there that I won't get into tonight. But that is something that, we as a county have gotten together, we've identified as, this could help streamline services for folks. We can see more people a day when we're not spending more time doing research on, has somebody already assisted this month? Is there eligibility? Some of the things that DHHS requires us to do. If we have that centralized GA database, that has already been worked through the legislature and is in the statute. State reimbursement rates. Right now, LD 978 was carried over to increase the current reimbursement rate from 70% to 90%, and even the tiered support rate for the top 6, which we don't have any in York County. As you can see by our budgets, what we are doing on municipalities is no longer sufficient to cover the cost of homelessness. Hotels are charging market rate. We have to pay that rate. We don't have a choice when it comes to putting people up versus letting them freeze. We're not going to do that. None of us got into this job because we want to deny people. We're here because we want to help in a way that we can. What we have is no longer sufficient. The taxpayer is getting more and more frustrated with it. That's something I see year to year is, the budgets are increasing. It turns into an us versus them conversation, which it certainly isn't. We're here to help the folks that need it. We want to help the folks that need it. We need more support from the state level to kind of mitigate some of those financial losses. One of the interesting pieces that I don't know if you may have noticed if we look backwards, Biddeford's number of cases were significantly higher than Sanford's, yet Sanford's cost last year was higher than Biddeford's. One of the things that I do attribute that to is there is a method for reimbursement to emergency shelters, and I will go over that in a second. With that, shelter nights tend to be significantly cheaper than hotel nights. If we have a place, which Biddeford does in the form of the Seeds of Hope Warming Center, where we can reimburse bed nights versus pay for hotels for single adults, it becomes significantly cheaper even if you do significantly more cases. That's something that I would like everybody to kind of think about in a second. When we look at that process, though, the way it's currently written, the reimbursement for emergency shelter bed nights, it is ambiguous. It is antithetical to the spirit of GA, in my opinion, when you look at how the actual process is laid out and how we've been directed to go about it. One of the things that we as GA directors have looked at is, can we get better guidance on how to do this? We don't disagree with the process. We should be. If there's a way for us to put somebody in an emergency shelter and help fund the shelter, why not? But we need that process to be better defined. We've gone to the state before in the past to get better guidance. The guidance has stayed ambiguous because it is such a unique process comparative to other regular GA processes. We need more clarity on how to do it. on how to do it well and how we can do it effectively as a whole, as a state. So in conclusion to my portion, obviously homelessness and housing is significantly increasing municipal GA budgets. When municipal GA budgets increase, the regular budget increases. Nobody's happy when that happens. The need in York County across the state for modernization of GA data systems is evident. Having a centralized GA database would not only help save time, create more efficiencies within City Hall, it would also better serve those who need help. We can meet them where they're at when they have the need versus in a little while because we're so hung up on the 5 people before them. And then please, we request support for LD 978 in this upcoming session. Increasing assistance to reimbursement, increasing general assistance reimbursement rate for municipalities. It's a good thing for all towns, cities, municipalities across the state. Our budgets are crippling. We need that funding. So we want to collaborate on how to address the issue of homelessness. General assistance is and has always been a prime player in that system. Give us the tools to do it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. That was great. So it was a fair amount of information, so we're going to just pause for a second and see if legislators in particular have any questions about anything we just presented. We have Jake here. We also have Emily, who helped put together some of the GA data for Kittery and Elliott, as well as Gina from Old Orchard Beach and Vicki from Sanford, if anyone has any questions. Okay. We'll have time for questions at the end, so we can pick that conversation up then if people have questions. So what we'd like to discuss now then is a second issue related to homelessness. So as we all know and have seen, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, homelessness has a variety of faces in York County and across the state. It can be a family with kids in school who are sleeping in a car and may have been displaced because of financial reasons or other reasons, and the kids are still attending school while their parents are still working. It can be an older adult who may have been depending on their spouse's income for housing, and suddenly with the cost of housing increasing, they're no longer able to afford to do that, and they're at risk of homelessness. Or what is also true is we know that it can be folks who are struggling with significant substance use disorder and mental health issues. And so we're going to take a deeper dive into that issue, folks who are chronically homeless and are struggling with substance use disorder and mental health related issues. And so to do that, Chief Eric Small from the police chief for the Sanford Police Department, and Jen Millette, the deputy director at Sanford Housing Authority, are going to present a case study that we did, taking a look at 2 folks with 2 very different outcomes. So Jen and Eric.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk just briefly about the chronically homeless definition. So we've spoken tonight, or you've heard people talking about homelessness in general. HUD obviously also defines chronically homeless. So that's sort of almost a subcategory. And as Carter already highlighted, you're going to find individuals that have some pretty substantial impediments to not only securing housing, but potentially employment, going back to school, the things that you often hear, well, you pick yourself up and you can get out of your homeless situation, get a job, go back to school. And it's not as simple as that. So prior to my work at Sanford Housing Authority, where I've been for almost 6 years now, I worked for the York County Shelter Program in homelessness prevention and addiction treatment services. I did that for 30 years. And I can tell you that HUD has changed definitions and they've amended their definition, but the people that are being seen really haven't changed at all, at all. I think there are pockets of successes and areas that when community members get together, make improvement in and facilitate some meaningful change for individuals and families. It's nothing that seems to be sustainable for the long term, however, because the numbers just continue to grow. And a lot of the reason for that, I think we're going to find out just a few slides down from here. There's just not, Emily highlighted the continuum of housing. The same is true when you start talking about serious mental illness, substance use disorder. There needs to be a continuum of care to address those issues, and there simply isn't, and there really isn't in the country. It's not just specific to York County, Maine. It's a problem nationally. So as far as HUD goes and the chronically homeless definition, for the rest of this presentation, we are talking about individuals who have been homeless for at least 12 consecutive months, or individuals who have had at least 4 episodes of homelessness in the past 3 years. So it doesn't include the people that are what we would call marginally housed. They're, doubled up somewhere. They used to be included in the definition of homelessness, and you used to be able to receive some reimbursement and funding for serving that population, and you really can't anymore, but nonetheless, right, they still are drawing resources because living in a camper in Maine, maybe in the months of May, June, and July, August, nobody is too concerned about that, but this time of the year, it's a big problem. So the long-term disability piece can be a serious mental health issue. It could also be a physical impairment. It's generally considered permanent, something that's not going to go away. It also includes substance dependency. And when we talk about that, let's just be clear about what that means also. It's not, when you talk about chemical dependency or addiction, there's also varying stages, from sort of in the years and years ago, they used to say, oh, he has early stage alcoholism. This isn't a late stage person with alcoholism. And when they don't use that terminology anymore, but when we're talking about the chronically homeless piece, we are talking about people who are at the end of that sort of continuum of severity when it comes to the addiction and the use. There's every year Maine Housing sort of sponsors it, but people in all of our communities generally volunteer, different agencies, to count people who are homeless. This is the 2024 data from the last point in time count that they put all the numbers together on, and you can see, what they're reporting. Now, this is just the people that were, willing to participate in the point in time, and people will go out and look for individuals, not only say at like a free meal soup kitchen type of event, might go out to, an encampment somewhere where they know people are currently residing, to try and get an accurate or the most accurate count that they can. And, this data comes from those surveys being done. And I just wanted to say, because to me, it's certainly like, ooh, 43%, that means, maybe half, not quite half of the homeless population has either a serious mental illness or a substance use disorder. Keeping in mind, though, that this does include anyone who's homeless, right? So they're not necessarily meeting the chronic homeless definition, which is, I think, going to be a lot more substantial. And what we have seen, and I think Eric's going to talk a little bit more about that in his case studies, is that the chronically homeless population, by far, it is very close to 100%, have some degree of serious mental health issue and substance use disorder. One might be more prevalent or more worse than the other, but it is just about 100%. And that's certainly not reflected here in this data. And I could certainly hypothesize why that is, but I'm time limited. So I'm going to let Eric come up.
Thank you, John. Hey there, my name's Eric Small. I'm the police chief in Sanford. It's good to see everybody. A lot of familiar faces. Excuse me. We've talked a lot about data, and really what I'm going to be talking about is just really from the heart. The two cases I'm going to tell you about are ones that I handled personally. Back in 2018, when we recognized that we were having issues in Sanford with people experiencing homelessness, I was the officer, the first, street outreach or mental health officer or whatever you want to call me back then, that went out and built relationships with people experiencing homelessness. So I do have quite a bit of experience, street experience from that, from the outreach point of view. And it has really even changed since then. Here we go into 2026. It's very, very different for our current officers that have to handle such situations, which is really patrol officers right up to the officers in our mental health unit. We do have a mental health unit that focuses strictly on helping the people that Jen just told you about with severe mental illness and people, experiencing homelessness. They kind of run together. So the case study that we're going to talk about today, I'm sorry, we're working the slides too here. We're going to talk a little bit about John Doe. And John Doe is a man that my wife and I, who's up there at the end, just happened to run into one night when we were going to the grocery store, taking a run to Hannaford, and down on Elm Street, we saw somebody kind of in distress. It was a day off, and I wanted to keep going to Hannaford. But we went down there and checked it out. And just for a little bit of history, anytime Diane is with me in a vehicle, we run into crazy things. It is a legit truth. I've been in foot chases just trying to go to Walmart with her. So she's really not even allowed in my vehicles. But here we are again experiencing this, and of course we checked it out. You guys, most of you know both of us, we care. And we went down there, and there was a person clearly under the influence, on drugs and mentally ill, could hardly talk. And I called for some backup, because in my old age I need that from the young officers. And they arrived, and the person had a warrant. I think they had a few warrants, if I remember correctly. And what do you do in that situation? Police officers just want to, we want to arrest people. We became police officers to take people to jail, to protect the community, to assure that everybody's safe, to arrest people on warrants, to stop crimes, to interrupt crimes, all those good things. But we also did it to help people, obviously. All of us, I think, since we were little kids, why do you want to be a cop? I really want to help people. And, we have to balance the guardian versus warrior mentality. A long time ago, when I started 25 years ago, it was very balanced. And right now, it's really out of tune. And the expectation of the police is guardian. And we got to find a way to get that back to the middle. And that's what we're talking tonight, and the legislature can help us do that. Anyway, back on track. John Doe, we've had 6 contacts with him in 30 days, we learned, after the end of the story I'm about ready to tell you. And we noticed there was no coordinated follow-up or any warm handoff between the agencies. He had contact with the Sanford Police Department, the York County Jail, Goodall Hospital, and the court system. There's no available beds, even if this gentleman wanted one. And we also learned that the agencies very much work independent of each other. I'll add the fire department to that too. He rode in the ambulance. And we don't communicate. There's no system set up for such things. So the first contact we had, this is the day I told you Diane and I ran into him, was on June 13th this year. And we encountered him, I take that back, I'm sorry. The first contact we had was patrol officers on June 13th, had contact with them at a local store, where often we encounter people experiencing homelessness that the store calls us, and they wanted him trespassed, and we did it. And he was under the influence, but not enough to take him into custody. We're only allowed to take people into custody for what we call protective custody if they're a danger to themselves, if somebody's intoxicated or slightly under the influence of drugs. There's a line there that we have to walk. So that day, he was cooperative, and we sent him on his way. The next day, or not the next day, June 20th, he was found in the lobby of one of our buildings here in town. And he was unconscious, unresponsive, and EMS was called. And he was transported by the ambulance to the hospital, and he survived this overdose. It was a drug overdose, brought back by Narcan or what have you. He survived, so here's our rescue touching this person. Here's the hospital touching this person. Hospital generally, right now, keeps them for a couple hours until they sober up and then sets them loose. Think about that. This is a person with substance use disorder that just essentially died 2 hours ago or could have died, and we just say, you're better now, you're on your way. Now, would we do that with a person, like a cancer victim or something like that? Of course we wouldn't, right? We wouldn't just send them down the road. On July 1st, this is when Diane and I encountered him. I saw him having issues, called some other officers over, and he had some warrants. But he was so impaired on drugs and so mentally ill. Of course, the jail doesn't take somebody like that. They won't admit them to the facility. So our officers, we put the warrant aside and we send them on their way up to the hospital. We gave him a ride that day. The officers did a good job. They evaluated him, and the only thing they can do is take him to the hospital. Protective custody, the only thing we have to do is take him to the hospital, which we did. Excuse me. Which a couple hours later, he was released. Again, second trip to the hospital, second time being at least on drugs. Got better while there for 4 or 5 hours. The hospital can't blue paper this person, meaning they can't force them to take them into custody because there's nothing set up to do that. So the next day, I saw this person at Main Street Marketplace. Same person. I'm like, oh, well, not the next day. Yeah, it was the next day, July 2nd. And I'm like, oh, he got out of the hospital. Not surprising, right? And there he is, not intoxicated. So I called the officers down, hey, we're going to arrest this guy today. And I wholeheartedly believe that, as most of you know more than me and better than me, that there's many different pathways to recovery, and I do believe arrest is one pathway. And the next story I tell you will prove that to you. So I wanted him arrested, not because he should be in jail, but because that's the safest place for him, so we didn't find him dead, So we arrested him, and we took him to the jail, and he was released from jail on July 7th. So I don't know, I bet you if you checked in your phones, July 2nd was probably a Friday. I'm guessing he spent the weekend. I don't know that right off the top of my head, but he was released from the jail. Again, the jail touched him. The jail knows he has substance use disorder. We share the same computer system with the jail. They can look to see the contacts we've had. The hospital can't access that information, nor can we access their information. Released from jail. 3 days later, July 10th, he was dead. And I personally find this to be, a really tragic, sad case in the sense that this man probably didn't have to die if there was a system set up to help him. And I don't know who, I see Representative Mastracchio, but I don't know the other. Can you just raise your hand if you're a legislator so I see? Oh, great, thank you. You guys can fix this. If you leave here and do nothing, please don't. Have conversations in Augusta. Try to fix this. Bring in people, not me, people like me, bring in officers that touch these people every day. Police officers touch homeless people, not literally, but touch them personally every day. The police have turned into your mental health workers. We employ a mental health first responder, but she only works 8 hours a day. Our evening shift, our midnight shift when she's not here, those officers you're asking the police to address homelessness. It doesn't work. The police should be protecting people from crime and arresting people. And frankly, they're getting burnt out. I throw that out there. They're getting burnt. You can't have your police in the state of Maine do this anymore. There is a thing called enforcement fatigue, and they're at it. But they're cops. They keep going out there. They keep doing it. And, you know, they don't want people to die either. But they don't have a tool belt and all the magic. Only the legislatures can help fix this. The next story is really personal to me. This is Jane. I obviously know her real name. But this is back when I could still run around and chase people. I try not to do that nowadays because I'll fall over or hurt my shoulder or something. But this is somebody that I hounded, arrested multiple times, yelled at me, complained about me, made complaints to the chief back then that I was mean, you know, all the things, right? Multiple contacts, including arrests, and it says relapse, but I like to use reoccurrences. Many reoccurrences. Back then, I was checking homeless encampments that we had in Sanford every day, finding this person in a tent, almost dead, many of times. You okay? Checking on her. But what I found is that summer, I think it was we have 2020 on there. That might have been when we got her into recovery, but it was 2018, 2019. What I found was the personal relationship. I remember showing up down at Heritage Crossing. Many of you know where that was when that was a homeless encampment. And just going down there in just regular beat up clothes. And, you know, that was early in the spring. By the end of the summer, I was just a guy in a homeless encampment, a friend. They would say to me, I can't believe you don't carry a gun down here with us. I'm like, oh, I have my gun. But, you know, they didn't think I did. You know, I was just casual, to the point where they trusted me. And that summer, with the help of other officers who helped on a part-time basis, we closed down that encampment, and we didn't just get out, don't come back. We got people in treatment. We took people to Mild Zone. We drove somebody over to New Hampshire. I don't remember, some town in New Hampshire. Any place we could find to bring people, we were doing it. And that's the secret sauce, in my opinion, the relationship. But it shouldn't be the police officers. There needs to be community outreach. It's not cops. They will trust anybody. We just happen to be the only ones available right now. And I mean, my feeling is they don't want our police officers in these situations. Uniforms intimidated. I told you I was down there in plain clothes. One time I went down there in uniform and it was a shock. They remembered, oh yeah, he's a police officer. We need people that can build relationships, get to know people, learn about their lives. I was calling this person's parents daily. And it goes a long way. That's the type of relationships we need to build. We need to get our cops out of the homeless business. And we've done that in Sanford. Not that we don't help, because we do. We still are the first responders. But we've really tried to focus it on our mental health unit, on mental health, and include our community partners, the Housing Authority, YCAC, you know, all the community partners. We did have, until recently, we had the York County Shelter Program. We really, they do an amazing job. That's one thing we should all know. But I was able to build this trust, and I was able to get her into Layman's Way, which is now closed. If any of you don't know what that is, it's right outside the jail. It's a treatment facility that if you were in jail, you could opt to go to Layman's Way, or you could serve your sentence, and people would opt to go to Layman's Way. Now, it wasn't locked down. They would escape from Layman's Way, but the director would call me about this person. Hey, Jane ran away. Asked my wife, okay, I'll be in, whatever time it was. Track her down. This woman thought I was everywhere. I mean, that's what it came down to. But I guess what I'm really happy to report is now this person, I don't know, they see something I do online, or they comment, they see a comment on Facebook or what have you. This person's an advocate for the police department now. This person credits her arrests on saving her life and how important it was that that was her path to recovery, which is great. But the key is arrests. That's what you want your police doing. And right now, it's very difficult for law enforcement to do their job. So Jane had a supportive relationship with me. She also had treatment options. We were able to coordinate a little bit better 7 years ago. And we had some good follow-up for her. And she's in long-term recovery, lives in her own apartment, isn't homeless, doesn't live in a tent, which is amazing. If I said her name, I'm sure some of you know her. John didn't have any of that. Our officers knew him, but didn't know him. No relationship with anybody, no outreach. Your police officers are very busy handling crimes. That's the truth of the matter. If we didn't have dedicated people doing this, nobody would be doing it at all. No coordination, no system set up between the hospital or the jail, the fire department or us. And please understand, I'm not putting blame on anybody. It is just what it is right now. But it doesn't have to be this way. If you, Maine State Legislature, put your heads together, forget about parties, and think about people. And unfortunately, that exact same place that I had him arrested that day is where he died. Right there. You know, I hadn't read the case file until the other day, and trying to read less, look at less pictures that I don't need to see after 25 years, but seeing his pictures and seeing that, I'll tell you what, it hits you pretty hard. One thing we've done in Sanford that's quite amazing is we've had the overdose task force, we've had the homeless task force for a couple years, led by the city manager. And he's held us together because some of us, me included, have been like, do we have to keep doing this? Because this work is frustrating for everybody. But we show up and we do it every other Tuesday. And we meet and we try to solve problems. And we try to fix things within our abilities, within our own little city. And I think we've done a really good job with that. But one thing the city manager is really good about Mr. Buck is recognizing he likes task force. I don't, but he does. So he's like, Eric, we need an overdose task force. I'm like, oh, another task force. You're killing me, Smalls. And but he was right. I'm not going to say that again, Steve, so don't get your hopes up. He was right. And we did it, and we met, and we got all these groups together that you see on the screen right here. And we talked about this, and we looked at each other, and we just said, it's broken. Everybody on this list is doing good stuff. The police department has a mental health unit. Our officers are interacting with these folks and doing what they can, but their hands are tied. The City of Sanford administration is working, through the homeless task force to do stuff on the overdose task force. The sheriff's department's trying to do MAT in the jails. They have state mandates that are not completely funded. I mean, that's a strain. The district attorney's office, they're trying to do things, I tell a story here. I don't know how many bail conditions John Doe had, but I won't get too high up on the horse here, but bail conditions are when somebody gets arrested, they get put on bail conditions when they see the judge. Don't drink. Don't go to Cumberland Farms because you can't be there. I'm just using that as an example. We have people with 26 sets of them. Think about that. What's the point at that point, right? We really need to think about that. And, I'm not going to point a finger at Kathy Slattery at the DA's office because the judges make these decisions. And, but it's a problem. We need to think about it. She's doing everything she can. Maine Health, their hands are tied. They have somebody come in on an overdose once they sober up. The problem isn't there anymore. Oh, it's not visible. You guys that work with people with substance use disorder, just because the drugs are worn off, you know they still have it, right? Obviously. So how can we fix that when somebody walks in? You know, it might involve taking away their freedom. You know, none of us really want to go down that path and talk about it, but what if that makes them alive next week? And Nassau Healthcare, they were there. They told us about what their experiences are. And they've been a really good partner as well. They were there in the beginning when I started doing this with folks. And back in COVID, they came out to homeless encampments and gave, you know, the booster shots and stuff. So they've been really good. So you got all the players here in our city that are doing everything they can. And, you know, we can, as a city, can communicate better. But, you know, this is just Sanford I'm talking about. This is my experience. You know, what happens if you live in Cornish or if you live in some rural area? You know, if you're a sheriff's deputy, you're just a guy that patrols 200 square miles. So I haven't followed the slides exactly, but I knew I'd do that. Key policy lessons. Recovery is, are you taking me off the stage? Oh, this is your part?
My slide.
Jenny, I was on a roll.
Yep, you're on a roll that way.
Thank you.
Well, that's kind of grim, Eric, in some ways. I think, so not from a law enforcement perspective, but from a clinician perspective, you know, what I would identify in, you know, 30 plus years in the world of treatment is, you know, there might be little Band-Aids here or there, but when you're dealing with chronically homeless individuals, right, the barriers that exist for them to even accept placement in treatment are so many that it's not even at times worth offering the treatment bed. And that's assuming you had a treatment bed to offer, which at this point in York County, we don't even have that. I was involved in the design and development and the startup of the Layman Way program, and that was a largely, initially when it started, it was a diversionary program. And that was the absolute goal, was to get people out of jail, which would be, you know, a savings, certainly, for taxpayers. And also, maybe offer some treatment and give some people some exposure. And so Jane Doe is well known to me also. And I actually believe I knew her before you might have met her. And, you know, she had a variety of barriers and struggles. But I think the key point, you know, you highlighted the relationship, and that's certainly a large component. But I also think that the Layman Way program, how that was operated, it was not traditional treatment. You know, if you did any research at all and looked at how residential programs operate, in a lot of ways, some of their practices are archaic, outdated. Certainly not in line with what would be considered a best practice. You know, people don't recover the first time around. It just doesn't happen. And so being available, so you have the relationship, right, that keeps showing up and says, come on, give treatment a try, let's try it again, you know, just because that time didn't work, you know, doesn't mean, but then you also have the treatment provider saying, yeah, come back, we'll take you back, you know, no questions asked kind of thing. So, you know, this slide identifying crisis response has been around in York County. I know it's statewide also, but I'm only going to speak because my knowledge is primarily York County. I remember when they started the crisis response services years ago, like 20 at least, and the kind of design of it, it was meant to go to people's homes, meet people, you know, in the park if that's where they were, meet them in the hospital if that's where they were, to try and facilitate placement in alternative or get their needs met. What is it that they're in need of? And unfortunately, you know, that system never really evolved beyond kind of where it started, you know, which was certainly it's providing a service. I'm not saying that, but there are individuals who will get taken to the hospital. They're under the influence. Well, it's not a mental health concern. This is a detox issue, you know, or this is an addiction issue. And we're not going to do anything about their mental health stuff because they're under the influence. And yet, if you were fortunate enough to have a detox bed available in York County, which we don't, but we will, they're going to go to the detox and most likely be told, ooh, you know, mental health-wise, you're not doing so well. We really can't help you until we get clearance from a psychiatrist or a doctor, you know. So right there is a problem, right? And so here's the individual in the middle of this system that just is bouncing people all around, you know, or like I just did to my microphone. Or telling them to show up, you know, 3 days from now for their outpatient appointment, or, you know, to get a ride from here to there when everybody in this room knows they're staying in Central Park. You know what I mean? They don't have a vehicle. They don't have a means to get a vehicle. They probably don't have their main care because they missed some sort of review, or, I mean, it just goes on and on. So we're expecting people to pick themselves up by their bootstraps, but they're going to fail before they even try because we haven't equipped them with everything that is necessary to have them be successful, in my opinion. That's my opinion, my experience. This is just a couple of things. So the York County Recovery Center here on the, I guess the left for you guys, that's currently under construction right now. That is going to bring 58 treatment beds to York County. It'll be available for all York County residents. 8 of those beds will be detoxification beds. 16 of them will be 30-day residential treatment. 16 will be halfway house treatment, which is a 6-month. And 10 will be long-term, which is up to 9 months. It will also provide medication-assisted treatment, case management, aftercare. So when somebody completes the residential treatment aspect, they can continue to come back. It will offer intensive outpatient. So if somebody doesn't need residential, but they still are, the point is, this is the housing continuum slide that Emily showed, except this is for substance use disorder. This is my pie in the sky for 30 plus years in the field, and it was, what would it be if you could have anything you wanted? And this is it. Combined with the slide on the right, which is Sanford Housing Authority is, this is not it, this is a picture of Houston Commons, which is a home for good or housing first permanent housing project in Portland. But Sanford Housing Authority is also going to be constructing a home for good or housing first permanent housing project for the precise people we're talking about. So that is the full continuum. If they need detoxification, they're going to get it. They need residential treatment, they get it. Medication-assisted treatment, they're going to get it. They need housing, they're going to get it. Is that going to solve 300 and something, the number that was on the slide? Nope, it's not. But it is significantly better. And people aren't going to have to bounce around, you know. Once they're at the awesome kind of opportunity or observation beds there. So those are specifically designed for law enforcement who's out at 3 a.m., who picks up John Doe, who says, nah, I don't want any treatment, you know, okay, but it's cold out tonight. We don't want you staying out here. Are you willing to just take a bed over in Alfred? You know what I mean? You're free to leave whenever you want. You don't have to sign your life away, but just make me feel better. Will you go there? You know what I mean? And if, when they kind of sober up the next day, they want to leave, they can leave. But but if they're there, there's a possibility they might see some other people that they know, or, you know, and it just kind of, the opportunities then are just ginormous for people like him, so. That's it for me.
Thank you, Eric and Jen. And so it's good to end with some strategies that we're moving forward with that can be really helpful. The Recovery Center is a result of leadership at the county level in partnership with the state, which is a very great innovative strategy. And then the Home for Good, or Housing First, is leadership at the state level to invest state money in sites in many locations across the state. And that's a result of the legislature and the governor's priorities. So opportunity for questions, and I see Representative Gear has a question for us.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I'm Tracy here. I represent District Number 4, for the Housing and Economic Development in the legislature. I want to preface my comments by saying how grateful I am all of you on the stage, as well as our different Trouble Street and service programs all around the state, who have been so instrumental in educating us on housing and on the committee and prior to that, the housing committee. I've been working on these issues for 5.5 years now, and I just look at you all and the folks that we work together. Eric, to your question, to make this happen, because the solution to the challenge, the ongoing challenge of how do we make sure that people facing housing challenges have a path forward and have a path to become permanently housed, which I know is the goal we all share. And so I have 2 questions. So again, thanks for all the great work. My first question does have to do with sort of the status of the projects in your county, because yes, the Recovery Center, I am so grateful that our county commissioners took that ARPA money and used it for something that's going to benefit every single part of your county in such an important way. It's great to hear it's under construction, and I'd be curious as to the status of that, and then also knowing that the announcement of the Home for Good project is again a cooperative effort. That was very specifically an outcome of all the work that we did and all the work that we did together to make that funding available, to make those projects happen. And maybe have a December deadline for the next slate of applications and how to do that. So my question is, with regard to the status of these 2 projects and the co-location of the Home for Good property next to, I understand, the Recovery Center, is that correct, or nearby? So we'd just like an update on the status of those projects, when you all see them coming online, and then are there gaps from a legislative perspective that we still need to address to make sure those connections are made with people. And then my second question has to do with the emergency shelter facility. Emily, as you called out, we don't have an emergency shelter currently. And so some of the presentation to me, I was struggling with a little bit, because we're looking to streamline funding and reimbursement for GA for emergency shelter. If we don't have an emergency shelter, how does that work, or how should it be working? And do we have a, so those are kind of big picture questions.
Jen, do you want to respond to the status of the Recovery Center?
Yeah, sure. The Recovery Center, like I said, it is under construction now. It's anticipated that it's going to open in October of ¡26. It will be a phased opening, meaning not all 58 beds and all the additional services I identified will be up and running in October. But the priority is on the detoxification beds and the 30-day residential program. And then from there, because it's going to ultimately, I think, at last count, we're looking at about 85 to 90 full-time employment positions. So it's big, you know. But yeah, we're looking at, right now it's set for October.
Diane, Home for Good?
So Home for Good is going to be located in Sanford, and we're working right now on site control. So hopefully we'll have that completed by end of December. And then it hopefully will be ready for lease up in 2027, probably the fall of 2027. So there's 5 agencies that were awarded the Home for Good, and we created a cohort. So we're working together and trying to kind of get it going each stage of the game so that they all kind of finish at once so the next round can then happen. So there will be a gap in between, obviously, now and then for both recovery services and for housing for people that are chronically homeless. And that's not funded through as you know, you did it, through the COC. It's funded so thank you for doing that. Because that's hugely important now with the changes that are coming down, especially for Housing First. That's not supported right now. So without that particular legislation, we would not be having Home for Good. So that's critically important.
So for folks, I think most folks in the room are aware of this, but so recently HUD issued a significant change in its funding for folks who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, and it's explicitly moved away from funding the Housing First or Home for Good model. But the projects here in the state are funded with state funding, so they are not at risk. And then your second question was around the closing of the adult shelter and the gap that creates. And I think that gap is felt all the time by all of us as a resource. And so I know there are folks who continue to hope that that we can resurrect that shelter. There's nothing active that I'm aware of right now to do that. I think there are efforts and there are certainly interested parties, but there's nothing that I'm aware of that will make that happen.
I'd also like to add that we do have the family shelter, which is now the warming center for families, is that the hope is that we do find an agency to take that over. So it would be nice to have some legislation for funding that family shelter beyond what's already in the legislation. So that's kind of the general assistance part of that.
So there have been many conversations happening here in York County about what we can do to fill the emergency shelter hole. And I think that one of the biggest barriers right now is a location. We have a potential service provider that's interested in perhaps operating another shelter in York County. We just have not yet figured out a way to find a location. So that's one of the major barriers at the moment. I just want to add real quickly to Representative Geer that you asked about gaps, and I think that for the Home for Good program, my understanding is that we are only eligible for one Home for Good project in York County, and clearly Abigail's going like this, so maybe that's not true, but maybe I misunderstood. I think that there's clearly a need for more than one project, so hopefully there's some flexibility around that, but okay. So there may be some leeway, but it sounds like we need to advocate for an additional project to be eligible in York County.
Any other questions? Representative Sayre.
Thank you, Carter, and thanks to all of you. I'm Representative Dan Sayre. I represent Kennebunk. I co-chair the Taxation Committee, and I appreciate very much the work that you all do. I'm more familiar with the situation in the Kennebunk Police Department and how behavioral health officers are used there. And my question has to do primarily with what Chief Small had to share. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit on, I believe I heard you put the onus squarely on the legislature to act, to resolve what you described. But when you articulated the differences between the positive outcome case from 5 years ago and the negative outcome case from this year, I'm looking at my shot of your slide showing the differences. I'm struggling to find where the legislative action is that you are calling for. The legislature can essentially do 3 things. We can take the people's money and spend it on things. We can change the rules under which citizens and public servants operate. and we can bring people together to study a problem and direct them to address a problem in a particular way. But the differences you showed have to do with the support relationship, the availability of treatment, the coordination between entities, and the availability of follow-up care. And if you could be specific in what the legislature can do to address those 4 areas, then I think we'd be very interested in how to take action on each of those.
Yep. I think the legislature was trying to do the right thing 5 or 6 years ago, when the governor, and the Attorney General's office implemented the homeless protocols that we are supposed to go by, which is to try to do diversion and not arrest people experiencing homelessness. And, changing the Good Samaritan laws, decriminalizing drug possessions, making possession of hypodermic needles legal. The things they did to encourage harm reduction. And I am, full disclosure, 100% for harm reduction. Where we now struggle is how does that affect the people that are trying to live in their lives and doing the right thing. We've come so far, and this isn't a political left or right, we're so far left that we've lost sight of the folks that would like to use the parks without stepping on needles, the police officers that would like to make arrests of people and see them true consequences for their actions. And if I was to call on the legislature to do anything, it would be to take a look at those things so that you can empower your police officers. And again, I guess I should clarify, I'm only speaking about the people with the mental illness and the substance use disorder, the severe cases that the police are interacting with. I'm not talking about a homeless family or anything like that. My experience is with the drug user that is causing chaos in our community, and officers' hands are tied. And it's my belief that we have to have enforcement of the criminality along with the outreach that I told you about. The difference is, one difference is the officers weren't worn out back then. I was the officer. So I wasn't the police chief. I was the detective that Chief Conley said, we have a homeless problem. And frankly, I did it because I was like, I want to help some people, and this is the people that need help. I volunteered. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But the difference is there wasn't the fatigue of all the other expectations that are on your police officers right now. And if you came out, I know you said Kenny Bunk and Chief McKenzie, frankly, was a mentor of mine. Many conversations back then with him about this, given his experience, his own personal and, his love for this work and how much he cares about people experiencing substance use disorder. So I learned many, many things from him at that police station in Kenny Bunk, just visiting him. What should I do here? What should I do? I was flying by the seat of my pants. But the difference is cops were doing cop work and I was doing that work. Now all cops are doing this work. And cops shouldn't be doing the work at all. Now, like you said, you could give money. That's awesome, because we need money. But the police don't need money. We have money. We can arrest people. We can respond to violence. We can be the warriors that the public needs us to be when they want to go down that dark alley and nobody wants to go but a police officer. And the problem is their time is consumed with people experiencing homelessness right now. If I brought in my evening shift right now, they'd tell you how tired they were. And it's not that we're not going to get cops in the state of Maine if we don't do something. Look how many cops we don't have right now. It's because people coming into this field right now, the expectation of what they want to do and what being a police officer is. It's changed. I deal with this every day. I mean, my business is personnel, and I listen to the officers. And I know right now it's winter, so the people that are experiencing homelessness aren't out, but I know next summer they're going to be. And we don't have a shelter. The difference is I had a place to bring them back then. This person I could take to Layman's Way. York County Shelter, I'd pick them up, York County Shelter employees, not Jen, because I'm afraid of her, but Scott Shaka, one of the other employees up there in intake, I'd bring him out on a ride-along. We'd go out to homeless encampments together. He was also a person that could just communicate really good with these folks. He'd come out with me, and we'd drive people right up to the shelter. You can't do that anymore. There's no place for an officer to bring somebody. So we encounter somebody in Central Park that's open drug use, that's using, and the public thinks that we can do something about that. Most people in here would probably think if we saw somebody with a needle in their arm, passed out next to a tree, we could do something about that. The bottom line is, there's nothing we can do. The state lab doesn't test liquid in a needle. You have to prove what's in the needle. I mean, you guys know what's in it, right? But you got to prove these things. So what do we do with that person? Here's a little Narcan, wake up, have a good day. Back then, we would take them to jail. And they may get saved there, or they might not have 26 sets of bail conditions. I keep saying it, but maybe it's just because this is my business, but that's crazy. That just means we're kicking the can down the road as a society. And by all means, sir, I'm not putting it all in the legislature, but you guys do have the power that we don't have in the city to make this change. And I told you before, it's nothing to do with politics. It's just about saving lives and helping people. It's that simple. Somebody is going to die next week and the week after that. And is it better? Less people dying? Yes, there's more Narcan. But I would dare say there's just as many overdoses. We just don't know about them because everybody's got Narcan. That's what the options program did. Got tons of Narcan out there, and the governor's office did a great job. I commend her for that. I've talked to her about this. I was on what was I on? Sorry, Maine Recovery Council. I was one of the founding members on it. I'm a recovery ally, but I'm also a cop deep down in the roots. And we got to get it away from the police officers, away from the paramedics, and into the hands of professionals. Some of these people out here that are trained. I'm not trained. I'm just some guy that cares about people that wanted to help a woman that was going to die in a tent. And we, as a city, honestly, are just done with it. We're done with that person that doesn't care about you, or you, or you. And homeless protocols, it doesn't say we have to do them. And frankly, people are going to get arrested. And that's not the right thing. We want to help people. But that's all we got. That's the only tool we got. Now, I don't know if that answered your question, but I'd like to see us get back to center on the laws so the police can take action so that they don't feel like their hands are tied. I'd like to see, we talked about these two buildings. They're not up there anymore. Amazing. Greg Zinser and the county commissioners, it was an incredibly brave move to make that happen. Unselfish. It helped all of us with their money. And you do have the power to allocate funds, and we just got to put our money in the right place. And I believe it's in outreach professionals. Portland has the cops in Portland. We modeled our mental health unit. I went up there and met with them. That's how we modeled our unit. We were the second unit in the state. At one point, we were the leaders in the state. People were coming to the Stanford Police Department to see how we were doing things. I'm quite proud of the officers. When I moved up in rank and they took over, that built it and that are still building. We're not experts. We're just doing the best we can. And we have somebody there with a master's degree, a social worker. but we're still learning. This is new. These fields are new. So I'm kind of going on, but I believe in Mainers care, so, and you wouldn't be here if you didn't. So we just got to think differently. We got to think outside the box. Sometimes it's hard to make tough decisions or make people do things they don't want to do. But it might be the only way that they survive, I guess, you know.
If I could pick up on
Yeah,
one
you
of
should
the-
probably pull me off the stage again.
No,
Carter.
I just want to pick up one of the themes that you touched on, and also Jen touched on her presentation, which is about relationships and the importance of relationships, and that what we're hearing is that those relationships really shouldn't be with police, they should be professionals. And so there's very little street outreach capacity in York County. It's a tremendous gap in the work we're doing. And so as Jen described, treatment is a journey and may take many steps, and some of those steps are forward, some of those steps are backwards, and then forwards again. That requires relationships, and that requires street outreach capacity. So that's a very concrete difference that can be made in York County in this effort, would be to increase our street outreach capacity.
I think the other thing that's really important to look at also is who's going to do this work, who's going to do the street outreach, who's going to do the diversion program. So we need to look at work studies to show who can we attract to this business and the level of pay that they get to. We can look at PNMI, private non-medical institutions, to see how those are run as well. So there's lots of opportunities to really kind of look and gauge where we're at and who we need to, because we can talk all we want that we want money for the street outreach, but if we have one police officer in the mental health unit that's doing that work, that's not going to cut it. So we need to attract people to those positions as well. So we need to look at that. Thank you for the question.
The mental health unit isn't doing that work, as you know. Their focus is mental health now, mental health first response. Our person has a radio, and they hear the call, and they go to it just like a cop. We're not to the point where they go by themselves yet, you know, unless she absolutely knows the person, but always goes with a cop. So I would like to get us to the point where 2 mental health officers go, mental health first responders go. The cop's not needed unless there's violence. That's a big step. I do worry about safety, you know, but I won't go on. I see my boss, so I'm going to call on him.
So Steve, if you don't mind, I want to make sure we have opportunity for legislators to ask questions. So are there any other legislators that had questions or observations that they would like to share, ask, or share? Steve, question.
Right. So they've all but had an intervention with me, right? Because I get so upset about the topic of the recidivism that we're experiencing with the chronically unhoused, which recognition was given here tonight, is almost 100% SUD and SMI, right? So when you asked earlier, what can the legislature do? You can change the rules, right? So hang on to the terminology of grave disability. So everybody that knows me, I throw everything into a spreadsheet and describe it mathematically and stare at that for hours and come up with conclusions. Well, we're talking about human behavior here. We're talking about addiction. We're talking about mental health. There's no mathematical equation that solves that or fixes that. You can't explain all human interactions with that. So I put it into a flow chart. I kept trying to figure out where we can make a change in the system. I realize the state legislature is just as hampered as we are as municipalities from a fiscal standpoint. So I was so pleased tonight when Emily started out the presentation with the recognition that there's so much good that's coming from your partners here, from the state legislature down here to the partners here in York County, making the best use possible with all of the funding that's coming through Main State Housing and those other areas. There have been tremendous successes in our county because of that. And in general assistance, when Jake ran through all of that data set, you know, the epiphany there is that GA has become a primary response mechanism for housing. I'm 30 years into this now. I can remember a day when it was about food and necessities and other elements, and housing was the least utilized as far as general assistance, but it's not the case anymore. And we're financially strapped, as the state is again, trying to meet the resources that were mandated to provide those services for, so recognition on that. Back to the recidivism of the chronically unhoused, until just recently, I didn't have, you know, we talked about this is educational for the legislators tonight, show them this information, make them aware of the impacts, but what do you do about that? So grave disability, when I look at what other states do that Maine is not currently doing, and connecting the dots, what can we do better? The chief talked about John Doe, and with John Doe, there were 6 points of contact made with that individual that was chronically unhoused, had a number of outstanding warrants, SUD and SMI. All of those elements that were talked about this evening were present in that individual. We studied him for that the last 30 days of his life. The epiphanies that I had in studying that was that he had been taken to the hospital twice. We talked to the medical director. Why wasn't this individual not blue papered? Well, you can't blue paper for SUD. That's only for mental health. Couldn't do that. Oh, by the way, there were no beds available to assign him to, so he couldn't be blue papered anyways. So there's a capacity issue there, right? We're back to fiscal constraints. We're back to getting the beds in place. So you move on from that. What was the next touch point? The individual was arrested, spent 5 days in jail. 5 days in jail. We developed the overdose task force around this individual, and you saw the impressive list of everybody here in York County, from the district attorney's office to the jail administrators, sheriff's department. Everybody was at the table trying to solve the problem. The epiphany that I had there was that for longer-term incarcerations, 2 weeks or longer, there's medication-assisted treatment available for them. And they go into that program, and there's a level of success with that, and there's a level of non-success with that. Who has better success with that? Well, Somerset and Franklin counties are using Sublocade. So we brought in the representatives from Sublocade to look at that 30-day injection and the success they were getting there. State's working on that, okay? So, but the big epiphany that I had from that, establishing the overdose task force, was that short-term incarceration was extremely detrimental. Why? The individual was out, was not taking drugs for that 4 to 5 days. Resistance goes down, goes back on the street, and does immediately what he was doing before, and he overdoses. So the short-term incarceration was more detrimental than a longer-term incarceration. There was no offering of diversionary services, right? Can you go on a diversionary program? Oh, what? Because it's not available, right? Layman's Way is closed, right? So all of these epiphanies were going off. What do you do about that? That's where the grave disability comes in. When you look at what the definition of grave disability is, we don't have that here in the state of Maine. Under Title 34B, 3801, you could add that to the definition. That would address the issues. It would include SUD along with SMI for the blue paper capacity. It would lower the thresholds for what is considered to be harmful when you're assessing that individual at the medical level to get that person into treatment. I will suggest that Maine, I'm an evidence-based guy. I like to look at things like evidence-based. What have we been doing? What results did it produce? What we're doing now with SUD and SMI is producing poor results. That's the recidivism. That's the constant churn. What can we do better? You lower the threshold to entry and reduce your over-reliance on self-directed treatment, which is not taking place. I've been trained since way back 25 years ago, when opioid addiction first came into our state, that medically, when you become addicted to opiates, you chemically alter your brain forever. The addiction never goes away. You lose the ability to make an appropriate choice to have yourself treated because you've lost that in that addiction. We fail to recognize that. So thinking that a person is going to someday, some do, someday, many don't, take that treatment option early enough and they end up dead. The difference with the Jane Doe study was the diversionary programming was there. She was arrested, was incarcerated, but chose to go into the diversionary program. The chief, I don't know if you recognize that, spoke specifically that under the homeless protocol and the state legislature further eroded those laws that make it so difficult now for us to arrest anybody and even get them the option of going into diversionary program. So if you look at what other states have done, which I did, California, Washington State, and Colorado, all have very strong definitions of grave disability. California has probably one of the strongest. I would suggest that that's the one to look at because they include substance use disorder and SMI into the definitions of who qualifies to go into medical treatment. We have talked in our overdose task force that the judicial system should put in place a structured release program. So if somebody comes in, they're not going to be incarcerated for 2 weeks or longer. They're going to be released with or without bail conditions. There should be a structured release program when somebody's recognized to have substance use disorder, that they're handed into a program of treatment. An assisted outpatient treatment facility and or care that we have available, such as through Sweetser and Nassau and other entities in our community. So it's not about asking for more resources, it's about the further coordination, not operating in silos, getting those elements coordinated. But you as state legislators, I would ask you to step to the table and take a look at grave disability. Lower that threshold so that we can get more people into diversionary program and in treatment that we're unable to do so today. I would suggest that's the change that you can look at. Thank you.
We are coming to the close to the end of our session, so I'll ask any final questions or observations from legislators. How about from our panel? Any final thoughts from any panelists?
I'm that guy when
Except
everybody
Eric,
wants to
who's
go
our-
home. I just want to say thank you for everybody coming out. It's really important that I see nearly my full city council and my boss and some officers, the Stanford Police Department and all the staff and all you guys that really care. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. So thank you very much for coming out. Appreciate it.
Words of appreciation and also stay involved. I think that there's a lot of people here who are not legislators, and there's a great opportunity to get engaged throughout the year in advocating for some of the bills that were on the slides and others that may pop up. But we always need more voices at the state level and also locally. There are pro-housing ordinances or housing projects coming through your town. I highly encourage you to get out and say yes to them.
Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you for your presentation and the information you shared today. Thank you very much to everybody who came to listen and to join us in this conversation. And we look forward to working together on the upcoming session and also, as we already do every day in our work in the communities in York County. Thank you very much.